Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video, I thought that we could go through and discuss some key tips and tricks regarding creative essays which come up as Section A in English Paper 3. So what we're going to do in this video is just go through a couple of different styles of writing which you can be utilizing when you're writing these essays, and a couple of things that you need to remember in terms of style and language and grammar. So let's get into it. So there are a variety of different essay styles that you can use when you are looking at Section A of your English Paper 3. So I'm going to run through a few of my favorites. Now you can choose one of these styles and then write in this style, or what you could do is combine different elements of each of these styles to create your own unique essay. So I'm going to go through 4 different styles with you and talk to you about the characteristics of that style and whether I'd recommend it or not. So the first one is a narrative style of an essay. So this is when you're telling a story. This needs to be written in the past tense because this story has happened in the past, and you have to use first person perspective. So you must use pronouns like I, me, and my, telling you the story from your perspective. In a narrative essay, you need to make sure that you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So there must be some sort of storyline, some plot that we can follow, and there must be some sort of action. So something needs to happen in this essay that is going to allow your reader to become enthralled in the story and interested in the tale. This is a bit of a challenge to do when you look at, you only have 400 to 450 words, but it definitely can be done. So you need to have a very strong sense of what your story is going to be. So definitely a plan is essential, but a plan is essential for any essay in my opinion. You always have to have a little bit of a planning. A couple minutes to plan before you actually start writing, but a narrative essay is essentially tracing the story. It's quite important to understand the different styles of essays before you write so that you can be intentional about your writing. So if you decide, okay, I want to tell a story, then you know, okay, I need to be doing a narrative style essay. These are the different things I need to hit. I need to make sure to do it in past tense. I need to make sure to keep the first person perspective. I need to have a beginning, middle, and an end. So like I said, you don't have to necessarily choose one, but just knowing the direction that you're going in. Okay, I want to tell a story. That means I've got to use some of these narrative techniques. When we look at a descriptive essay is all about describing something. We're going to use first person perspective once again, but here we're going to really emphasize our adjectives. We're going to use some really interesting vocabulary. We're going to harness the 5 senses, so really go into detail about what you see, what you hear, what you feel, etc. With descriptive essays, it's quite important to think about showing rather than telling. So instead of telling me, oh, the sky is blue, rather give me an emotion or show me how the sky is blue or how that makes you feel. A really nice way to do this is to use figures of speech, and this can be applicable to any creative essay. Using figurative language is really important to drive your point home and to really make your marker resonate with what you're saying. Another thing with descriptive writing is framing. So this is one of the trickiest essays to write under exam conditions because you have to have a really, really strong vocabulary and you have to be able to describe something, often one thing or just, one group of things in a myriad and a variety of different ways. So having some sort of framing device in terms of the introduction and the conclusion as to, I wouldn't say a story, but some sort of frame of reference, some sort of context as to why you're describing this thing or why you are engaging with this thing or why you are describing it. Next, we have a reflective. This is one of my favorite essay styles to do. It's first person perspective. And here you're going to be switching between past and present. The idea with reflective is you are reflecting on a story, on something that's happened to you, an experience. And you are telling that story and telling me about that experience or telling your mark about that experience, but you also are bringing in a lesson of what you've learned from it. So you're looking back on it now as a sort of more mature, grown-up person. So you're talking about a story maybe from your childhood, and then you talk about how you feel about that now or what lesson you learned from that experience. So I find this one to be a really mature style of writing, a really interesting style of writing that allows you as the author to really show a change in yourself and to show a level of maturity. So here, as I said, it's a story or stories with a lesson. There's a sense of growth and change. It's always nice in the introduction for a reflective essay to put a trigger moment. So what made you think of this particular moment? So a good example would be like you were paging through your planner for the year as you're starting to write your matric exams now. And then, so that's like the trigger moment for you thought of how scared you were on the first day of school. Or the first day of matric, and then now you can reflect on writing matric exams, how far you've come, and you're not that nervous person anymore, you're a confident person. So some sort of trigger moment like that where you're looking through your planner, you're looking through your diary, and this is what you realize. And then the reflection is going through the story of what happened in your past, and then reflecting now in the present on what you learned from that experience or how you've changed. And the last one I'm going to go through is an argumentative or discursive essay. So this is more of an academic style of writing, and it's more focused on use of evidence. You don't have to use the first person pronouns. You are really trying to make a point, almost being like a lawyer. So you are stating a fact, sort of what you think, like the sky is blue, and you're giving me different points in each body paragraph explaining or giving me a reason to believe that the sky is blue. You have to use evidence, so this can be a little bit tricky in an exam context because you obviously can't research that evidence. So you're going to have to make sort of these sort of big statements about things that you already know. So it's quite important for this one that you do know your topic very well. It must be logical, focused, and persuasive. So the idea here is to persuade the reader to believe what you want them to believe, whereas your intention of a narrative is to get your reader interested and invested in the story, with reflective and descriptive as well. It's the sense of engaging with the reader's emotions, like getting them involved in a personal tale and being honest and open and vulnerable. Whereas an argumentative or discursive is more academic and it's more focused and persuasive. So in general, what are the non-negotiables? What are the things that we have to make sure are present in all forms of a creative essay for Section A of Paper 3? Your grammar, punctuation, language, this is very important. Because this is a writing paper, it is all about whether you can express yourself fluently. And so if you make a lot of punctuation errors, a lot of the punctuation errors I see tend to be the overuse of a comma and the underuse of the full stop. So a lot of times students write really, really long sentences, and so their points sort of get tangled and mixed up, and the meaning of what they're trying to convey and the intention, purpose of their sentence gets lost. So please make sure that your grammar, your punctuation, your language is not impeding the readability of the text. So it's not making the marker difficult for the marker to actually understand what you're saying. So that's the first thing, is that it must not impede readability. It must actually flow really nicely and fluently so that your meaning can come across. And secondly, we want to make sure that it is really sort of singing and really going above and beyond. And so we need to try and be using idiomatic expressions and figures of speech, figurative language, really showing that you are comfortable with the English language and that you can really express yourself in a beautiful way. And not just, as I said, when I was talking about descriptive essays, not just telling me what happens in the story, but rather showing me. So showing me how you're feeling, showing me what's going on in your head, and using figurative devices is so effective, like similes, metaphors, hyperbole, exclamation marks, punctuation marks are also pretty important. So two things over there, remembering to use it properly, your grammar, punctuation, and language, to make sure it's effectively conveying your message, but also going above and beyond and using some interesting techniques to really engage with the marker. Register is important as well. Remember, this is a formal piece of writing, so you don't want to be too colloquial. You really want to try and make sure this is academic. And yes, it's personal and vulnerable and emotive, but at the same time, it is written with that degree of academic intention. Remember your paragraphs, you must have an introduction, either 2 or 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. You must make sure you stick to those paragraphs. I know you don't have a lot of words, but you need to make sure you do have at least a little introduction and a little conclusion to really bookmark that essay and to put it in context. Planning is essential. I talk about this all the time when it comes to writing anything, whether it's essays or transactional pieces. You must remember to plan. And the reason why you need to plan is because you don't want to use up everything that you want to say in the first paragraph, right? Because that's you run the risk of doing that if you don't plan. You just sort of write all your ideas and you get them done in the first paragraph. And then what tends to happen is you start repeating yourself in the next paragraphs because you don't really know what to say. So make sure you plan, you figure out what are 2 different aspects to this topic, what are 3 different aspects to this topic that I can really explore. How can I make this a beginning, middle, and end? How can I make sure that this progresses nicely and that it looks at the topic in a complex and nuanced way, that it's not just one-dimensional. So having that planning, showing the progression of your thought in different paragraphs is really important in showing the different elements and different aspects of the topic. It must be convincing. So whether you're writing an emotional piece or you're writing an argumentative piece, you must really be convincing to your markers that they believe what you're saying and that you can really convince them of your emotion, that they can feel involved in the story almost, and really sort of understand and resonate with the emotions that you're bringing across. Link to the topic. This is so important. I know there's a few students out there who like to study their essays beforehand and they try and they memorize it. And I mean, you can obviously do that. You can do what you want, but make sure that when you're in the exam, whether you've studied an essay, like memorized one, or you're writing it on the spot, make sure that you link it to the topic. So if you write your whole essay and you haven't mentioned the topic title in the essay, then your marker is going to see there's something wrong here because it doesn't seem to actually link to the topic. So always remember you have to put the number of the topic that you've chosen, but make sure that in the introduction or the conclusion, or even in the middle, but at least once or twice in the essay, you have directly referenced what your topic is. If you've chosen one of the pictures as your topic, then what you can always do, and what I'd recommend that you do, is that you create your own title based on that picture. So if it's a picture of a dying rose, perhaps, then your topic could be the dying rose, or you could do it more metaphorically if you'd like and do what it represents. But making sure that you give a title to your essay and you give a title, or that your topic is sort of referred to both overtly and covertly in your essay. So you're linking to it, without actually saying it, but also at least in the introduction and the conclusion, you need to put a reference to that particular topic and that particular word to show your marker that you have specifically designed this essay to fit this topic. You have to be intentional about your piece because you only have 400 to 450 words. So there's really no time or space to be giving long sort of waffling language. You really have to be intentional. So planning is so important so that you don't run out of time and run out of words to actually express yourself. Proofreading is the last thing. You must make sure that you go back and that you proofread. You do have quite a bit of time in this paper, so there definitely is an opportunity if you plan well and you put aside the right amount of time for everything. You do have time to go back to proofread, to make some edits, make some changes, make your sentences shorter, check your spelling, check you've got your capital letters where they need to go. So really, I would set aside at least 10 or 15 minutes to proofread. So just having a look at the assessment rubric for a second, we've got 30 marks allocated for content and planning. So this is referring to the organization of ideas for planning, awareness of purpose, audience, and context. So if we look at the exceptional level, the 28 to 30 out of 30, we need outstanding, striking response beyond normal expectations, intelligent, thought-provoking, and mature ideas, exceptionally well organized and coherent, including introduction, body, and conclusion. So what we can see here is the expectation is that firstly, it needs to be original, it needs to be personal, it needs to be something that only you can write. Remember, your markers are marking hundreds of papers every single day at metric marking, so making yours stand out is important. And the way you're going to make it stand out is that if you really are vulnerable and you really access something that's unique about yourself. So really, you've got to put yourself out there, which I know is quite challenging sometimes, right, to put ourselves out there. But remember, especially in matric finals, this is marked anonymously. So you need to go for it. You really need to bear your heart out in this essay and come up with something original, something that only you could write. And then it needs to be coherent, it needs to form a nice structure, it needs to logically progress. And that's where your planning really comes in and why it's so important to plan. Then we have language style editing. So this is referring to the tone, register, style, vocabulary appropriate to purpose or effect in context, word choice, language use and conventions, punctuations, grammar, spelling. So here if we're looking at the exceptional band, tone, register, style and vocabulary highly appropriate to purpose, audience and context, exceptionally impressive use of language, compelling and rhetorically effective in tone, virtually error-free in grammar and spelling, very skillfully crafted. So here what we're looking for is, have you used the correct register? You've been formal, but you've also been emotional. Have you been using some figurative devices, some idiomatic expressions, some figures of speech? Are you making sure, have you read through your work? Have you proofread your work? There's no silly spelling mistakes. There's no errors impeding the readability, and that your diction, that your word choice is really exceptional, that you've gone above and beyond and used interesting vocabulary that's really going to set you apart. And then lastly, we have structure, features of text, paragraph development, and sentence construction. So that's for 5 marks, and these are easy marks to get if you really take care as you write. So for the highest band, we're looking at excellent development of topic, exceptional detail, sentence, paragraphs exceptionally well constructed. And once again, that's got to do with planning. Have you actually understood the topic, broken it down, understood the different aspects, the different layers of complexity, but also been able to structure your paragraphs effectively? Sentence construction, making sure that you are writing sentences that do make sense, that function as individual sentences, but then also work together to create meaning. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video helpful. Just in terms of my advice with timings, you can obviously take it or leave it. Your timings in your exam are totally up to you. But I would definitely recommend that you spend around 10 to 15 minutes, or at least 5 minutes, planning your essay, about an hour writing it, and then another 10 to 15 minutes actually proofreading it. So that should take you to about an hour and 20 minutes or an hour and 30 minutes. And then you've got 45 minutes for each of your transactional writings. And with that, I would once again say, reserve 5 minutes of that time for planning, and then you have 40 minutes to write each transactional piece. The planning is absolutely important because it's going to allow your writing to go quicker, but it's also going to allow your writing to become more focused. So I hope you found the video helpful. Please remember to like the video, to subscribe to the channel, and wishing you the best of luck on your exams.
Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to go through a guide to transactional writing for DBE students. So this is if you're writing the Department of Basic Education NSC examination. So as you know, transactional writing comes into paper 3. It is tested as section B. So section A is your creative essay, section B is transactional writing. And if you look at past papers, they typically provide you with 6 different topics for transactional writing, and you can choose 2 of those topics to write about. So you don't have to do all 6, obviously. You select 2 and you write on those 2. Each of the pieces is 25 marks, so it constitutes for 50% of your paper 3 paper. Section A is 50%, section B is 50% ultimately. So what is transactional writing? Transactional writing is more, I like to think of it as more real-world writing than perhaps an essay. So you're going to be writing in formats which you would probably use in your professional life after school. But remember that transactional writing is all about the student's personal voice. It is your opportunity to express your thoughts and opinions in a formal test or examination. These thoughts must be insightful, must be backed up with sufficient justification. But the entirety of paper 3, the creative essay and the transactional writing, is your opportunity as an English student to present a form of originality. So if you think about paper 1 is very strict in terms of you have to adhere to the text. Paper 2, even more strict to an extent. You are adhering to literature. And here in paper 3, you have more freedom in terms of how you're writing. However, in saying that, it still has to be formal, it still has to be academic, and it still needs to fit their criteria so that you can get the marks that you deserve. So it needs to fit the rubric for transactional writing or for an essay, whatever you're doing. So in another slide, we're actually going to go through the rubrics, and you can see how your marker marks your transactional writing, what they're looking for. So as much as there is a sense of freedom, there's also a sense of this is still an exam, this is still academic, this is still getting marked for its English. So some questions that you need to ask yourself are, what is the intention or purpose of this piece? Who am I writing to? What should my piece be about? Should it be formal or informal? What's my plan? An introduction, 2 body paragraphs and a conclusion, or something else? Different formats have different structures. So these sorts of questions you need to be asking yourself as, during reading time, as you're reading through these pieces or the topics. Have these questions circling in your head. It's really important in paper 3 to use that reading time productively, because there's not a lot to read in the paper, but there is a lot of thinking that needs to be done in terms of analyzing the topic. So my advice for any piece of writing that you ever write is that you need to spend time actually analyzing the topic and seeing what they're asking of you. So ask yourself these questions as you are looking through the topics. So let's get into some different aspects and let's break down the expectations of transactional writing. So something which is quite obvious, but that you get marked on, is content. And you have to make sure that your content is organized and intentional, that it is clearly aligned with the topic, that is purpose-driven, that it proves an argument or an intention, is insightful and original, incorporates perspectives on current affairs if relevant. So your content, the big thing with content is it has to be relevant to the topic. So you can't get a topic on one thing and start talking about something completely different or completely obscure. And if your idea about what you want to talk about is, slightly original, that's great, but you have to link it and show the marker how it's relevant. I think sometimes what students forget is that their marker is not in their head. I know it sounds silly, but often they have all these thought patterns and they've linked their story or what they're going to write about to the topic in their head, but sometimes they actually forget to write that link for the marker, and you're not there to tell your marker that link. So often when I go through text, pieces of writing that students have done, and I read it with them and I show them how I'm marking, they're like, oh, but this is what I meant. I'm like, well, you haven't put it on the paper, so therefore I can't mark that. So if you are going to go original with your content, if you are going to, add that originality or add that creativity, that's wonderful. This is your time to do that, but you must show the connection to the topic. I hope that makes sense. Your content needs to be relevant, so it needs to be aligned with the topic, but it also needs to be organized and intentional. So you can't just put a brain dump of all these different ideas. It needs to be structured. It needs to have a clear intention behind it. Why are you providing this piece of information? Remember, when we talk about literature essays, and you can see in my previous video on literature essays, I always speak to you about argument. And in this piece, obviously, it's not a clear argument like a literature essay, right? Where you're arguing a particular perspective. However, you still have a particular intention with every single format, and so you still want to make sure that you're delivering on communicating that intention, and so your content must all be based around that, and you must keep invoking what the purpose or the intention of the piece is. Showing insight is so important. So insight is like the opposite of superficiality. So when you write something, when you think about something, instead of just thinking of something on a surface, superficial level, try and sort of zoom in on that idea and provide some sort of insight that is original, that is unique to you, that shows that you have thought about this topic in detail. If it makes sense to include current affairs or to show your knowledge of the world, then include it. If it makes no sense to do that, then don't do that. For example, just a simple example, if you're writing an obituary, for instance, then, incorporate the fact that maybe this person died of COVID or something. That's more of a current affair, I suppose, not really at the moment, but I hope that you sort of catch on to what I'm saying. So if it makes sense to include something about the staggering unemployment rate, maybe you're writing a formal letter and you can include the staggering unemployment rate, that's a current affair, and that shows your mark, oh wow, this person is worldly, they are thinking, they are reading. The next thing to keep in mind is the audience and the format. So as you can see with content, it's pretty similar stuff to what you should be thinking about when you're writing an essay. But an essay is very different to a transactional piece of writing, and that's where your audience and your format comes in. So going and studying your formats is so important, because it creates a really good impression to your marker, and you're going to get marks for it. So make sure that you go and study the correct addresses and things like that. I know it seems very tough, and especially if you're watching this at the end of the year and you're about to write your final, going to study those formats is somewhat tedious, but it's really quite important. The big thing with transactional writing is that you're not just writing an essay, you're writing to your marker. But here you're actually writing to an audience. So you need to understand who your audience is. Are you writing a magazine article that's going to be featured in some fancy magazine that business people read? Or are you writing a speech to your fellow matrics? So you need to think about your audience, because knowing who your audience is, it's going to affect your register and your tone. So it's going to affect, are you speaking formally or informally? And what sort of tone are you using? Are you using a respectful tone? Are you using a critical tone? So understanding who you're writing to, as much as what you're writing about, is paramount. And thirdly, structure. So format, in my head, is different to structure. Format refers to your addresses and such, and structure refers to, do you have a good introduction? Do you have good body paragraphs and a conclusion? And we'll get into some formats which don't require that. But that, in my head, is the sort of typical way that we approach any sort of English piece of writing, is that we have different paragraphs, and each paragraph has a distinctive intention, which joined together ultimately answers the broader question. And then thirdly, some people will love this, some people will hate this, but this is paper 3, language counts. So it's not like just answering questions where you have to get the point across. Your language here is very important, and you're going to get marked down if you do not use appropriate language and grammar and punctuation. So language is not to be underestimated. Avoid spelling and grammar mistakes. Use language and register appropriate to the intention and the classification of the piece. Integrate advanced vocabulary. So make sure that you are proofreading your work. What is nice about paper 3 is it is a long paper, and so if you manage your time correctly, you should have enough time to proofread, meaning you go back to your text that you've written, your piece of writing, and you go through it and you check, have I made any slight concord errors? Have I put a comma when I should have put a full stop? So you have that opportunity to go back with sort of the markers glasses on and be like, okay, what can I adjust here to ensure my language mark is up where it needs to be? So don't underestimate it. Avoid those silly mistakes. Remember, keep in mind who you're writing to and use appropriate language for that. So don't use slang or informal language. I would avoid using slang at all costs, honestly, because this is still an English paper, but don't use informal language if you are going to be addressing parents at your formal assembly at school. So make sure your language matches that. And make sure that you integrate advanced vocabulary. So don't be afraid, just because this is real life, sort of, I'm putting it in inverted commas, real life ideas or pieces of writing or formats of writing, you still need to integrate advanced vocabulary. This is still ultimately an English piece. So make sure that if you know a fancy word and you know how to use it, include it. Try and make your writing stand out from others. Use the advanced vocabulary. So let's have a look at the rubric. So you can go and you can find this rubric as well on all the past paper memorandums or marking guidelines. And as you can see for paper 3, they don't really have an actual, memo, because everyone writes something different. That's the beauty of English. But you are going to be marked within this framework. So understanding what your mark is looking for is therefore important. So as you can see, content planning and format, which includes response and ideas, organization of ideas for planning, purpose, audience, features, conventions, and context, is for 15 marks. And then your language style and editing, which refers to your tone, register, style, purpose or effect, audience and context, language use and conventions, word choice, punctuation, and spelling, is for 10 marks. There is a slight overlap in this rubric, I must say. However, I want you to think of it in terms of the 3 aspects that we just spoke about. We spoke about content, then we spoke about audience and format, and then we spoke about language. And you can see here that the content and format is in the first 15 marks, and then you have your sort of audience and language in your last 10 marks. So let's have a read of the exceptional, right? Because that's what we're aiming for, the 13 out of 15 marks, and the 9 out of, or to 10 out of 10 marks. So for content planning and format, we want to see an outstanding response beyond normal expectations, intelligent and mature ideas, extensive knowledge of features of the type of text. Writing maintains focus, coherence in content and ideas, highly elaborated, and all details support the topic. Appropriate and accurate format. So the big tip that I would have for you with regard to getting these 15 marks for content planning and format is that you have to plan. So you have to take the time to actually analyze your topic, and then to take a highlighter, take a pen, underline the key points, and actually draw up a plan very similar to how you would plan an essay in terms of what your paragraphs are going to be about, what your ultimate intention or argument is, and make sure that your topic or your intention or your purpose comes through these, sub points that you've generated. So planning is crucial to getting those 15 marks. Secondly, language style and editing. How are we going to get 10 marks? Tone, register, style, and vocabulary highly appropriate to purpose, audience, and context. Grammatically accurate and well constructed, virtually error-free. So if you have a good plan, then you're not going to be worrying about your content because you've put all your bullet points down on your planning page, or whether that planning page is on the question paper or if it's on the answer book. Remember, if you do put it in your folio, to cross it out afterwards once you've actually written the piece. But once you have those bullet points and you have that planning, now all you have to do is take that and write it in beautiful English, right? And write it in nice sentences. And then you can focus intensely on making sure that your language style and editing is perfect. So now there are many different formats, and I would highly recommend that you go through the notes that your teacher has given you or that you've made in class, and that you study all your formats so that you are 100% prepared. Today in this video, I'm just going to talk about a couple of my favorites that, if they do come up, I would really recommend that you select one of these options, because I feel like these are the ones that are the easiest format to remember, firstly, but secondly, allow you to really shine as an English student in terms of explaining yourself and coming up with great ideas and being able to substantiate those ideas. So this is my personal opinion. We're going to go through, I've got 3 different slides of the ones that I think you should really pay attention to, but as I said, really go through all the formats for everything so you're prepared. So I've put these 4 on one slide, and the reason why I've done that is because their formats are pretty similar and their intentions are also pretty similar. So let's go through them. A formal letter. A formal letter you are writing to someone who you don't know in a business capacity or something along those lines. So you're going to address them by their full name, by sir or madam. So with a formal letter, you must obviously remember your addresses. So on the right hand side, you have your address. Then on the left hand side, you have who you're writing to. Remember that a formal letter can include many different types. So a letter to the editor, a letter of complaint. These are all examples of formal letters. Then you would write, dear sir or madam, you'd skip a line and you'd write your heading and you'd underline your heading. You'd skip a line and then you would do your introduction, skip a line, body paragraph 1, skip a line, body paragraph 2, skip a line, conclusion, skip a line, yours faithfully, and you end off with your full name. Remember, if you're writing a matric final, you don't want to use your own name. You should use a generic name so that you allow for, so your marker is not, biased in any way, shape, or form. So make sure that with a formal letter, your intention is very, very clear, and that you're obviously writing with a very formal register and very respectful tone. You can obviously be critical if you need to be, but you need to be respectful in what you're saying, and you need to justify what you're saying. Formal letters can be really nice topics. Remember, you also have to look for not just the correct format. When you're going through your 6 options and you're choosing your 2, you should obviously look for the format that you prefer, but also look for, do I actually know anything about this topic? So if, for instance, it's about sport and you're an avid sports player and you know lots of things about sport, or you watch sport a lot, then go for it. You obviously have ideas. But if you're not really a sports player or a sports watcher, then it would be ill-advised to select that topic because you don't have rich information to draw from to include. An informal letter Very similar to a formal letter, except for the fact that now you actually know the person. And so you are writing typically about something that's less serious or less sort of worldly. So a formal letter could be about the state of education in South Africa, whereas an informal letter would be my experience of matric. Do you see how it's different? Informal letter is more personal, it's more sincere, it's more personal. So over here, you only are going to need one address on the right hand side, and then you would address the person who you're writing to, and sometimes you don't even have to write their surname because you know them. So it might be to a sister or to a teacher that you are writing this informal letter to. And the reason why it's on the same page here is because same thing, you're going to have introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. I would definitely say not to put more than 2 body paragraphs in a transactional writing piece because you just don't have enough words in your word count to allow for this. Your greeting at the end can be a bit more informal, and you can sign off sometimes just with your first name as necessary. A magazine article is another wonderful, and I like to call these for the essay-like transactional pieces, because they're like mini essays that you're writing in terms of having an introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. So for a magazine article, remember to have a title and a byline, so writing who it's by, skip a line, and then you have this sort of mini essay in inverted commas where you get to explore this topic in a very mature and formal manner. And then lastly, we have a speech. A speech is a really nice option as well because you just have your title once again. You could perhaps put who it's by or the date, and then you have your introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Sorry, before your introduction, make sure to greet people, and at the end you can say thank you. And a speech is a really nice one, I feel, because it can be formal or it can be informal. So definitely read your question carefully in terms of who your audience is for a speech, so that you make sure that you adjust your language and your style and your tone and your register to fit who the speech is for. With the speech, you also want to try and hook the audience in. So if you can think of a creative way to start your introduction, that is wonderful. So if you remember a quote off the top of your head, or you want to list a bunch of different ideas or adjectives to start off your speech. Now, whatever makes sense to you with that speech topic, I would definitely recommend you try and hook your audience in to make it a little bit more sort of interactive, because a speech you can address you. We haven't actually spoken about pronouns, but just to make it clear, is that transactional writing is all about using those personal pronouns, about using I, you, me, my, showing your opinions, using the second person pronouns to engage and interact with your audience. The second type would be an interview or a dialogue, and this is a really wonderful option as well, because what you do in an interview or a dialogue is you don't have your essay structure like we've just been discussing. However, you still have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So remember, for an interview or dialogue, you have 2 people talking, usually have yourself and someone else, and you must make sure that you put a colon after your name to denote that the speaking has now started. If you'd like to show like a stage direction or what the person sort of looks like, or not looks like, but what they're doing, perhaps like shaking their head or talking excitedly, you can put that in brackets to show that it's not actually what's being said. However, don't overuse that. Maybe just once or twice is okay. So for an interview or dialogue, don't waste too much time going, good morning, how are you? Rather, keep that focus to the first 2 lines, and then you're done with it. And then you get into the beginning, and the beginning is where you actually say, and you can clearly state what the intention of this interview is, or what this dialogue will be discussing. Then you get into your middle, you get into your body, where you actually delve deeper into the ideas, and you show off your knowledge, and you really justify what you're thinking, substantiate, show your insight. And then the last 2 lines at the end, you wrap it all up and conclude. It's always nice in a conclusion to provide something for the other person to do. This applies to actually any piece of transactional writing. I encourage you to do this and this and this. That's a really nice way to end a conclusion, because then it's like the piece just hasn't just ended suddenly. There's a sort of continuation to it. And then we have the obituary, and the obituary is another good option, I would say, in my opinion. However, it doesn't follow any of the sort of technique or format that we've just previously discussed. So an obituary is what you'd write up about a person to publish in a newspaper after their death. And so often they give you a little bit of the information in the topic, and then you have to embellish that, and you have to then find other details about that person's life to put in the obituary. So the obituary is a different sort of format in the sense that the first paragraph that you have to actually share the details of who died, when they died, how they died, all of those basic details. In the next paragraph, you would focus on who that person was in terms of his career, his family, things like that are important, his profession. And then the next paragraph, you talk about more of the person's legacy, so how they'll be remembered, like did they do volunteer work or what their impact was on society. In the next paragraph, you talk about who they're survived by, so survived by his wife, and you'd put their name. So there is a lot of things that you need to make up. And finally, in the last paragraph, you would talk about when the funeral or memorial will be taking place. So as you can tell by that description, the paragraph on the career and who the person was, as well as the legacy paragraph, those need to be the longest paragraphs. They need to be the most richly detailed. And you really can show off your English knowledge in those two paragraphs. The other paragraphs are a bit more like sort of factual, but those other the two paragraphs about the career and the legacy, you can really expand on that, and you can really give a nice wholesome perspective of this person using advanced vocabulary. So please remember there are other formats as well. I just haven't gone through them today. So please make sure that you go through all your other formats. And when you're going through your formats, just keep in mind what's the intention of each piece. So I hope that you've seen, as I've gone through all these different formats, I've tried to pick out what the intention is, because having intention to your writing is absolutely paramount to your success in transactional writing, because it's going to guide what you're saying. So please, as you go through your formats, just keep in mind, what is the intention of this piece? What am I trying to say? What is the marker looking for? Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you found this video helpful. Remember to plan and to really go for it in your transactional pieces. Show off your knowledge, show off your English skills. So yeah, please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it, and good luck.